Well, sure. As far as the federal lands issues go, those are within the borders of Idaho, some of the ones you just mentioned. And Idaho needs to have a big, strong say in what's going to happen, and not have Washington, D.C. tell us what's going to happen. And it's going to be this way or the highway. And that's what D.C. says. No way. Those lands are within the Idaho border. And so Idaho should have a say and some control, if not all control, over that area. In fact, it was interesting, before I came to meet you today, I was doing a little research about lands, and according to the Idaho Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, the federal government has no ability to own lands within a state. And so it gets into quite a controversial thing, and it's a great topic to research. And so doing some reading today about that and what some of the Supreme Court rulings have been over the last 50, 60, 70 years about that within Idaho. Idaho needs to have a say, and a good example would be the forest, because 63% of Idaho, or just under 63, I think it's 62 points change, is controlled by the feds. They do a terrible job. They're ruining our lands. They're ruining lands within the Idaho border, and Idaho should get in and take charge of those lands so we can manage them. We can make sustainable forest products. I've said this a few times during this interview. I grew up here. I grew up in a mining town in a logging area, and there were timber sawmills everywhere. There are no sawmills up here anymore. 2 or 3 sawmills. It's terrible. But yet, forest fires every year because the federal government cannot manage the land. Give it back to Idaho. Let us manage the land.
Do you want to weigh in on that situation? The fact that we had several Idahoans that were incarcerated over that. We still have one. Todd Engel is incarcerated down in Pahrump. And we have, of course, we had Eric Parker and Stephen Stewart and Scott Drexler involved in all of that, and of course Ammon Bundy. Would you like to tell us your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think that they were incarcerated for cattle issues or for grazing issues or not following some federal guidelines. I think it goes much deeper than that. And it was something that we touched on earlier in this interview, was about federal lands. And I think the government is too overreaching. The federal government is too overreaching and wants to be too controlling of American citizens. And when American citizens want to stand up for American ways, for them to have the ability to indefinitely incarcerate someone, I'm totally against that. The American people need to stand up and start to push back. And I think that's why we're seeing movements in Idaho where people are conglomerating because we all think alike. It's why I never left. I'm seeing like-minded people that believe what I believe in coming here now. And we're getting strong, and that's a good thing. I want to touch on the comment you made because it came up. It was either a little over a week ago, and it was either in Priest River or Sand Point. I was up there for a couple of events. And this issue came up about this smelter. And the smelter's in Washington and Newport. But yet the prevailing wind blows that smoke to the east and into Idaho. And I think Idaho should have a say in that regard about being downwind from that smelter smoke. And the analogy or the comparison I'll draw is what happens with Idaho water. Just right up the road here a few blocks, the Spokane River. And the Spokane River flows into Washington. How come Washington can tell us you have to control your total maximum daily load, TMDLs? And it costs the city of Coeur d'Alene, the city of Hayden, the city of Post Falls millions of dollars to upgrade their wastewater treatment facilities because the water eventually flows into Washington. But when the smoke comes over from the Newport smelter into Idaho, well, don't say a thing. Well, I said to some watermen last week in Boise, I think on Tuesday night, I was addressing a group of people at the Treasure Valley Water Users Association, their board of directors, that I have a plan where the Spokane River at the state line just down the road here a couple miles, we're gonna dam it up right there. We're gonna put some canals in, and we're gonna send all that water to southern and eastern Idaho. Washington, it can dry up over there. And I know that's a little harsh sounding, and the Washington people will probably be all ticked off at me, and of course it would never happen, but get the point. Why can Washington put in a smelter at Newport and then not want to respond to the concerns of the people up in the Priest River, Sandpoint, that part of the state, about the terrible smoke coming over? But yet when we send them water, that's Idaho water, because the Spokane River is the discharge of Coeur d'Alene Lake, and Coeur d'Alene Lake's filled by the St. Joe and the Coeur d'Alene Rivers, all Idaho water. They're going to tell us about total maximum daily loads. It's a two-way street here. In Washington, you got to get their act together, and to the water issue, that's why we do state adjudication, and don't let the federal government get involved in our adjudication, because not only will they give it to other states, but then we got to deal with the Indian tribes wanting the water. And they're not even aboriginal to this area, come to find out. They're not the natives. You know, it looks like with the Kennewick man that was discovered quite a few years ago, the Asians were the aboriginal people of this territory, not the Native Americans. Now, I don't want to get into a big issue with the tribes, but they're not going to control Idaho water. You're getting me all fired up, Sherry.
I like this.
You're
You're
getting me all fired up.
Senator Risch has proposed the Scotchman's Peak to be turned into wilderness. And it's my understanding that we currently do not have any wilderness designations in this part of the state. What would you like to say to Senator Risch?
We'll decide up here what we want. And Senator Risch, although I appreciate the work he's done, he's a hard-working senator, and one of he and I am one of the most conservative members in the Idaho legislature, and he's, I think, one of the most conservative members in the U.S. Congress. But I'm not so sure Scotchman's Peak need to be a wilderness area. And what I get concerned about in that regard then is not allowing the public into some of those areas or limiting the access to those areas. And it's Idaho lands, and people need to have access. You know, no one wants to go in and trash them. No one's going to go in and ruin the area and stuff, but to limit the access is what concerns me. And again, it's just a great state. People want access to some of the most beautiful places of our state. And I tell my friends that visit and go around and come from the Sun Valley area, I said, that's pretty nice down there. That's the second most beautiful spot in Idaho. And they give me a look and go, what do you mean the second most beautiful spot? I say, because nothing compares to North Idaho. With the mountains and the lakes and the rivers and the streams, it is by far the most beautiful spot in Idaho, right here in North Idaho.
One of the biggest topics that we have going around, or that we have had going around for the last couple of years, are the refugees. Okay, Twin Falls has a real problem. We've got a lot of people wanting to bring in refugees.
No refugees. No refugees in Idaho. And the two places that allow them right now are Boise State University has a program, and the College of Southern Idaho in Twin Falls has a program. And the funding that those two colleges get, the university and the college, Boise and Twin Falls, is through federal programs. And I'm not at all in support of bringing refugees into Idaho. We've seen around the world too many problems. My wife and I saw them firsthand a few years ago on a trip to Germany. And we were going from Germany into Austria on the train. And we went by one area, and here were a few hundred refugees at the train station. And the local police were kind of, monitoring what was going on. But what my wife and I found so interesting is there were no women, there were no children, and there were no old men. my age. They were all young men. And what made me think about that as well, if they're refugees, where are the babies, where are the kids, where are the women, where are the senior citizens? But they were young men. Now fast forward 3.5, 4 years to the present, and look what's going on in Europe, and what's happened in Sweden, what's happened in Germany. And Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, at that time had let 1 million refugees in, and it is in France. And so Europe, I hope, is regretting what those European countries have done. In fact, in Sweden now, I've been told that there are parts of Sweden that law enforcement won't even go into those areas because the refugees have taken over those areas, and it is not a good thing. And you think we should learn from those mistakes of what the other countries did and have recently done. So I'm not a supporter of that at all in Idaho, and I think we should try to curtail, if not stop, and reverse the programs of Boise State and the College of Southern Idaho. To your point about immigration, though, if I could touch on it briefly.
Absolutely.
It needs to be totally legal immigration, because the dairy industry, it is so important down in the Magic Valley, in the dairy industry. And I mentioned a little bit ago the 10% increase in the dairy industry in their exports just to China last year. And they have a hard time getting workers. So they have a legal system of immigration where they can bring in workers to assist in the dairy industry, and that's really important to Idaho's economy. Or sometimes in the sheep industry, the cattle industry, where they're having a hard time finding workers, especially when unemployment's so low. Some of the lowest unemployment in the whole country is in Idaho. And so as long as it's a legal system, they're going back to their countries, they're paying what taxes they need to pay while they're in this country, and everything's reported and done in a legal way. I'm supportive of that, but not the illegal immigration, where the Mexican drug people, harsh criminals are coming out of Mexico. And boy, Mexico's got that door open, pushing them right out. Well, who wouldn't want to get rid of their worst citizens and send them up here? Well, that's where I've supported Donald Trump. I'm all for a wall. I don't think there's anything wrong with a wall at all.
In the meantime, would you support the National Guard going to the border?
Yes, if there needs some help, I think to protect our border from the illegals coming in, when someone enlists and is a member of the National Guard, they're going to be called on some pretty tough things to do.